Alright YouTube, we're back again for another problem from the Blind 75 list of LeetCode questions. This is James from Tech Talks with James. We are solving one problem per day for 75 days straight from the famous Blind 75 list that contains the most commonly asked coding interview questions that you can find online. And today we're tackling a medium array question. This one is called threesome, and it's kind of similar to the famous twosome problem that you've probably already worked through. The question asks us this: given an integer array nums, return all the triplets nums at I, nums at j, nums at k, such that none of the numbers equal to each other, but they all add up to 0. Notice that the solution set must not contain duplicate triplets, so we can't have any lists with the exact same values in them. And from the example, we have input of nums -1, 0, 1, 2, -1 and 4, and then the output shows us -1, -1, 2, -1, 0 and 1. Example 2, they don't give us anything, so we don't give them anything back. And then example 3, we have nums, it gives us one value of 0, which of course cannot be a triplet, so we give them back nothing. So how do we break down this problem? Well, the way that the first example is given to us, it looks kind of hard to, pass through this and try and work out where the triplets are. So the first step would be to get this into some organized fashion. So all we want to do is sort the array. So we've got -4, -1, -1, 0, and then 1 and 2. So that would give us something at least a little bit better to look at. Let me go ahead and just write that out. So first we would have -4, -1, -1, and 0, and then we'd have 1 and 2. Okay, so this gives us something to look at that's a bit more cleaner, and we can kind of think about how we can pass through this. So we know that we want to, of course, have a for loop. First, we'll start off with the 0 integer, which is -4. And what we want to do, similarly to the twosome problem, where we're just taking the focus number and then finding out what the complement needs to be to add up to that -4. So what we want to do is pass through the other integers in the array and just figure out if we can find 2 of them that could be added to this complement to equal 0. Well, it turns out the best way to do that is to set up 2 pointers, one on the front and one on the end, and just see if we can work towards the middle and find 2 values that can equal 0. And while doing that as well, we also need to be careful of having duplicate values. So we've got -1 and -1 here, and we know that we shouldn't check that twice, right? We should just move up to 0. All right, so let's work through an example. So first of all, we're going to take the focus of -4. Okay, so -4 is what we want to find numbers that will add to that to equal 0. So we can set up our first pointer, which would be at -1, and our second pointer would be at 2. We check to see if -1 plus 2 equals -4, which it doesn't. Now we want to check that if -1 plus 2 is less than or equal to the target, and from there we can manipulate our pointers to fit them in the best position to make the algorithm more efficient. So we take -1 and -2, add them together, and we check to see if they are larger than the target of -4. Since they are larger, -1 and 2 equals 1, we can take our higher pointer and just decrement it, so we're looking for lower numbers than that. So from there, we'll check -1 against 1, and we'll see that that also doesn't equal -4, so we'll just move the higher pointer down, and that'll check -1 and 0. That doesn't equal -4, so we'll just keep moving down, and so on until we break out of that first iteration. Next, we move our main focus pointer up to -1, and then we're just going to check the rest of the array. So we'll check -1 against -1 and 2, and we found, great, that equals 0. And we'll add that to some kind of results list, and then we'll manipulate our pointers so that we move past that second -1 integer. And so then we'll want to check 0 against 2, and so on until we've found all of the triplets concerning -1. And we'll just continue on manipulating our pointers until we get to a point that we can't check any more triplets. In this case, it would be nums.length -2. So let's take a look at what that looks like. We'll remove this example first really quickly. And okay, first thing we want to do arrays.sort on nums. And that's just going to put all of the integers in order, exactly how we want them. Next, we have to define a list that we're going to use to return the result. So we'll just do list, and then list is going to be a list of lists, and that's all going to contain integers. We'll just call that results, and that'll be a new linked list. Okay, next let's set up our for loop. So we're just going to do for int I equals 0, while I is less than nums.length -2. So of course, remember, we don't want to get to the point where we don't have 3 numbers to check. So that's why we're doing -2. And then we'll just increment I every time we pass through as usual. And the first thing we want to do is just set up an if statement. We're just going to check the condition. First of all, if I equals 0. Next, we want to check if I is larger than 0 and nums at I is not equal to nums at I -1. So what we're doing here is just checking for them duplicates. So we'll do if I is equal to 0, and we're going to say or if I is larger than 0 and nums at I is not equal to nums at I -1. All right, and this gives us everything we need to continue on. So we're just going to set our low pointers, our high pointers, and then we're going to set a target or a complement of, what we're looking for. So we'll just do int low equals I plus 1, and then int high equals nums.length -1, and then int target, and we're going to set that equal to 0 negative nums at I. All right, so we got our focus number in our example. Remember, that was -4. And now we just want to set up a while loop. We're going to loop while low is still less than high. And first thing we want to check if we have found our target, right? So we're going to do nums at low plus nums at high equals the target. And we'll just fix that spelling error early. And if we've found a triplet that matches what we need, we're just going to add it to the result. So we're going to do result.add, and then we're going to use arrays.asList, and we're going to add all those numbers. So we'll do nums at I, nums at low, and then nums at high. Great, so we found a triplet. Now what we want to do is just make sure we're passing through any duplicates of that triplet. So what we'll do is we'll do while low is still less than high and nums at low is equal to nums at low plus 1. So this means that we found a number at the lower end that's equal to the same number that we just found. So we're just going to do low plus plus to increment low. And we're going to do the exact same thing on the other side. So we just want to do while low is still less than high and nums at high is equal to nums at high -1. And in that case, we're just going to decrement high. Okay, so by now we're at the last iteration of the duplicate, whichever number that is. So what we want to do is just make sure that our pointers are set beyond that. So we'll just do low plus plus to increment low, and then high negative negative to decrement high. All right, so that takes care of what we want to do when we found a triplet that matches 0. Now what we want to do is figure out how we're going to manipulate our pointers when we found one that doesn't match 0. So what we'll do is we'll say else if, and we want to check if nums at low plus nums at high is larger than the target, and we'll just decrement high. And then we'll just say else increment low. So what we're doing here is just saying if the numbers at low and numbers at high is larger than the target, obviously we want to lower the total value of the numbers that we're looking at. So the best way to do that is just to decrement that high value. So, we're going for the lower numbers in the sorted array. Similarly, if it's smaller than the target, we want to get as high a value as possible. So we want to increment our lower pointer to reach the higher numbers. So that just about takes care of it. All we need to do as a last step is return our result array. And let's go ahead and run that and see what we come up with. Okay, so just a slight error. I forgot to close off my list declaration. And of course, it's not array.sort, it's arrays.sort. Great, so we've solved another one. This one's really tricky again, so we're getting into more of the harder medium ones now. So be sure to think through the problem, think about, it's saying threesome, so let's think about how we solve twosome and see if we can modify that and kind of extend our algorithms to give us a really clean and elegant solution to the problems. Well, if you're enjoying the video series, I just invite you to come back every single day. We're going to be solving one problem per day from the Blind 75 list of LeetCode questions. Don't forget to click like and hit that subscribe button, and I'll see you tomorrow for another question from the Blind 75 challenge.